This is the beginning of a series of discussions that really I've been thinking about for a long while. And I've had the team ask me to do some form of a dedicated discussion series really for years. Then I've always resisted it. It's a lot of time and a lot of other things going on. And I've never been willing to kind of sign up for that. I'm happy to contribute to other things, but this is the first time I'll do it in a more dedicated way, as much as I can in terms of the other things that we're managing with the organization and the movement and the Institute of Applied Metatheory. But really, the time I could no longer resist the sort of the pregnancy of the moment and the demand that we show up and try to provide better big picture transformative education, particularly for Zoomers. So one of the things that you'll hear me talk a lot about in today and also in this series is really talking directly to Zoomers. Even if there's no Zoomers here in the room, I don't know if there will be, but we're going to increasingly try to communicate big pictures to the next generation. We are at an extraordinary moment in human history for reasons we will talk about for the next couple of hours. This is a generation that's coming into that, and in way too many cases, we have small pictures posing as big pictures. We have small ideologies and small frames of mind that are posing as big pictures and are filling up the idea space worldwide in a way that is radically detrimental to the demands of the moment, radically detrimental to the identity formation processes that these kids are going to be going through. And not just them. Obviously, everything I'm saying also affects all of us, for sure. But I really want to speak to the ethical commitment and why I felt it was so important to try to do this now. The goal is to try to help people learn how to think integratively and how to think holographically. If we can help people think holographically from what is called a metasystematic mind, metasystematic cognition, and later into paradigmatic and cross-paradigmatic cognition. So teal, turquoise, and indigo. We can equip people to carry that into their lives in a new way and become transformations that are required to meet the transformation age on its own terms. Because right now, everybody is drowning in a complexity gap. They're drowning because the world and what it's going through is too complex for people to cognize properly. Big picture minds actually can see a lot of it and can actually kind of be with that complexity in a way that is not overwhelming. So that's our job. Our job is to help to try to go through the transformative educational process and the socialization of knowledge that's necessary to help people surf these humongous waves. The way we're going to try to do that is we're going to try to apply big picture concepts to real world applications. So it's applied philosophy in a way. And we'll try to do it in as sophisticated a way as possible. So what's a big picture mind? Well, the world is getting more complex. Ontically, it is getting more complex as it evolves. That's right there. That concept is something that not a lot of people know. In our community, we're pretty familiar with that. We're pretty comfortable with that idea. But the technical science behind that is not something that a lot of people understand. They don't understand emergence and the way in which strongly emergent structures have to or are evolving, and that our knowledge processes evolve along with that. And those knowledge processes and the knowledge of that complexity is arising with the minds at the leading edge, the brilliant minds at the leading edge in philosophy, science, art, humanities, governance, and politics. Like, we have brilliant people in this world, and they are generating knowledge, and they're generating beauty, and they're generating love and artifacts and all kinds of things that are capable of meeting that complexity, that real complexity, and the consciousness that is imbued in it. And I think that if more people saw that, they would be animated by the call to eros, the call to integration, the call to growing up and waking up and cleaning up and showing up. So that also is part of what we're up to. At the Institute of Applied Metatheory, which we founded a couple of years ago, one of the things that we talk about is the architecture of that complexity of knowledge. So the idea that a lot of our knowledge is coming from a disciplinary point of view, and what people think of as knowledge is largely disciplinary, right? We've got economics, we've got psychology, we've got sociology, we've got, anthropology, we have computer science, et cetera, right? So what most people think of as the human knowledge canon is fundamentally disciplinary. It's in these silos. That's not wrong, of course. That is where most of the knowledge has lived for a long time, especially since the birth of the university system, the modern university system 400 or 500 years ago. But over the last couple hundred years, we've also had a new emergent level of knowledge that has arisen, that is interdisciplinary, where we start to combine fields and we start to notice the findings, the paradigms of one field, and we're able to cross it with the paradigm of another field, and we're able to get new knowledge that's extraordinary, right? You cross psychology and economics, you get behavioral economics. And behavioral economics gives you a whole nother set of insights about human life and how we operate. Things you wouldn't have seen from psychology, things you wouldn't have seen from economics. You kind of have to cross them up to get these new forms of knowledge to arise. And of course, integralists, we have maps for this. And this gets to then the third form of emergent knowledge that is just in the last, arguably, depending on how you look at it, maybe century and a half, but really in the last 50 years has that emerged. And now this is no longer interdisciplinary, it is now transdisciplinary. Now, this is an extraordinary and qualitatively fundamental up-leveling of how humans can know. Because with transdisciplinary knowledge, we now are able to see patterns that connect. We're now able to see a bigger picture where bigger holisms with more differentiated parts and the patterns that hold them together start to become clear. This is a radical and innovative break in the human knowledge arc. Because with transdisciplinary knowledge, we really can then start to go back and say, okay, how is our disciplinary knowledge partial? What is it assuming or not assuming? What is it presupposing? And why do small pictures act like big pictures? Well, small pictures act like big pictures when you grab a piece of the elephant at the level of disciplinary knowledge and you pretend that it's a big picture because you don't know that there actually are fundamentally far bigger pictures that are available. So in a lot of ways, the work is to socialize the idea of transdisciplinary knowledge and the several systems that have come along that are very credible, very powerful from that level of knowledge production. And that's the work we're doing at the Institute of Applied Metatheory across big picture systems like octal integral metatheory, like dialectical critical realism or meta-reality, like complex thought and others. And this is not the place for it, but there actually is a fourth level that is emerging today called arc-disciplinary knowledge. And arc-disciplinary knowledge then begins to look at what is happening at the transdisciplinary level and tries to find the fundamental epistemological primitives of sort of the onto-epistemic occasions themselves. But that is for a different conversation. Who am I? Very quickly, I mean, some of you may know me. I'm the founder of Integral Life. Almost 17 years ago, I'm the founder of the Institute of Applied Metatheory. And I've walked in a lot of worlds. I've done a lot of things at the interface of the academy and government, entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, kind of a jack of all trades and truly master of none, as my kids never forget to remind me. And I guess, you know, a very wide-ranging mind, very curious intellect, and truly not really that good at anything, but it's, you know, the advantage I have of having had a wide range of interests is I've just seen a lot of things and have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas, which I'm going to try to bring through in this set of discussions that we do. So I'm going to make this probably a little more personal than I'm used to. If I relate stories or whatever, you know, it'll be I'll try to do that. You know, so anyway, let me move on from that. Let's see. In terms of the format, I'm going to try to, because there's so much to frame in this first piece. I'm going to try to do my best to frame a backdrop for where we are. And this is supposed to be a discussion, so I want to open it up and talk. But unfortunately, if I don't do that first part, it really doesn't do justice to what we're on about when we think about a big picture mind, especially in 2025. So I kind of feel like I have to suck up the oxygen this time, but I do want to leave time for us to try to discuss whatever's on your mind, and that actually really is more of my interest. The things I say, I want to say with some, you know, there's going to be kind of a confident humility. Like these are tentative things, fairly confident about some of the broad arcs, but there's obviously a lot in the details that we could argue about. That's just the nature of big picture sort of speculation and theorizing. But I think that if you notice, one of the problems we have in society is where we get so in the weeds. I mean, think about your average PhD, right? It's so in the weeds on some vector of verification that big pictures themselves don't have any room to breathe anymore. And what the world is desperately in search of is actually big pictures, as we'll talk about. It's core to the meaning crisis that we're involved in. Is big pictures had been destroyed by positivism. They've been destroyed by postmodernism. They've been destroyed by the metaphysical rejection of post-Kantian constructivism. I mean, you go on, and you can see why big pictures just didn't stand a chance. And yet we're at a time where we need them more than ever. And as I said, happily, we're at a time where they are emerging again in a credible sort of post-Kantian, postmodern, post-positivist way that they've already accounted for those critiques. So that's pretty sweet. we're living in a very, very lucky time in some ways, and a time of dramatic challenges as well. The backdrop for what I'm going to talk about today is the transformation age. This is something that I've talked about since my TED Talk in 2012. It was clear to me at that time, and I don't want to preface this too much. Yeah, just 10 seconds on it. I mean, it was clear to me after 2007 that what was going to happen at the intersection of the smartphone and digital technologies generally, plus high-speed data networks, is a radical restructuring of our epistemic structures, such that all of our structures would start to change, and they'd start to change faster and faster in real time. That's actually exactly what's happened. And so at that time, I called it the rise of the transformation age. I saw that the information age was ending and the transformation age was beginning. We'll get into that in greater detail in a bit. So let me get started. I have some slides to show you because I think these slides will help tell a story that is hopefully helpful to situate the big picture. And okay, can everybody see that? Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, as I said, so I'm going to try to do this in a sort of this whole series is a conversational, informal, and deliberative way. I want it to be spacious. You know, these are big ideas, and I want to give them room to breathe. I think that's important. As I said, the goal is to help Zoomers so they have a positive and liberating view for their lifelong trajectory, a sense of what's possible. I want to meet the need of a world that's awash in small pictures, posting as big pictures, as I said, and then not just apply big picture thinking in order to build bigger minds, but also understand and feel at home in the transformation age. This is going to be really important because there's so much change that is going on. So let's step back and go through a very quick quadrivial view, what we call a quadrivial view, because we're looking at it objectively, of the planetary holon. So a planetary holon means that we're looking at the planet, we're looking at it as a single system, and we're making a set of distinctions about that, about that view that break it up both hierarchically and sort of through a series of two polarities. Now, all of you will know this as the four quadrants, of course. And in this map, we see that we've got the individual person at the core of it. And the overall thematic here is the transformation age. So just call it this moment in history. We have the individual agent or person. There's different ways that we can actually define this ruler, as we know. For specific reasons, I put the institutional level as the meso level. There's a lot of theorizing in sociology that says that this institutional level is the appropriate way to think about the relationship between the agent and social and cultural structures. And so I've also deferred to that in that regard. So we have this institutional structure, and then we have a global backdrop. And then, of course, this plays out, and there are perspectival phenomena and things that we can notice in all four quadrants on the interior of the individual or the intentional psychological experience, in the interior of the collective, in the cultural and values and worldview and semantic experience, in the lower right quadrant where we see the social systems, laws, regulations, and external manifestations of our exterior collective. And then in the upper right, the exterior of these individual objects, which are either behavioral or objective. So I'm sure we're all very familiar with that. Now, immediately, when we think about where we are today, there's a set of just extraordinary, historic and cascading paradigmatic tsunamis washing over us. And they're all beginning some version of hitting apex in some important way. When we start and we look at the ecological transformation, the profound ecological transformation that we're going through, we notice obviously that we are moving into the Anthropocene, the Holocene from the last 12,000 years. Seems like it's going to be, it is coming to an end. Geologists mostly agree, although they're fighting about it, they mostly agree that the Anthropocene is replacing the Holocene. The Anthropocene, from the root anthropo, human, related, anthropology, means that we are entering a geological era characterized by human influence. And we see that no more clearly than in climate change, obviously. The Great Acceleration, another term of art in this field that's occurred since the 1950s, has really brought an accelerating set of effects in our lived and natural environment, or natural environment. Not just climate change, ocean acidification, all of the things that you could do that many disciplines are looking at. The background radiation of this, notice that it's emanating from the lower right. It's emanating from the global level of being. And it's pushing up into, but not yet totalizing, our behavior and our self-sense and our psychology or our culture. It really is predominantly in that lower right today still. The fires in Los Angeles, for example, are obviously devastating locally. And they're just one more effect or one more catalyst for humans psychologically to understand that we're in a new era, but that's not universally distributed yet, right? So that's why there's still a lot of white space up in the upper left. But from the point of view of the economics and the insurance system and like our social structures that have to contend with climate change, plus our state governments, plus our federal government, it's all kinds of a mess because we're not geared for it. We are simply not geared for it. Our governance systems are breaking. Let's move on to the next one. We are in the lower left quadrant going through another massive paradigmatic shift in our life world. That is the rise of hyperreality. This is an epistemological tsunami, truly. I take this term hyperreal and hyperreality from the magnificent work of Jean Baudrillard, one of the great postmodernists, who wrote in 1980 about the hyperreal. And he talks about how signs, our language, our imagery, our symbol systems, all of the things that constitute the way in which our culture mediates itself in the lower left quadrant. Signs go from representing a profound reality in ancient history, profound here meaning sacred, that our symbols were always designed originally to convey some sort of sacrality So they go from that to a migration where they go through these stages where our signs now, they start to disguise reality. You can think of the rise of radio, or really back to the printing press. And of course, they were also representing reality. So they were still representing reality, but then there's the beginning of some disguising going on, to then not representing reality at all. They get to the point where signs don't represent reality at all. So this is no longer that the map is not the territory. There's a complete inversion. The map is literally the territory. The hyperreal, the world of the hyperreal, is a world where the map is the territory. We've moved beyond Guy Debord's society of the spectacle, a world of false imagery of when he wrote that in the late 60s, to now a world of the faux real metaversal. Now, every society is desperate to reclaim some kind of reality, on and on and on. It'll continue to attempt it because we want to ground ourselves in reality. But what Baudrillard calls an implosion has occurred, where that can't happen because signs no longer distinguish. Distinctions don't distinguish. They've become meaningless. And so we have a fundamental problem with getting to sacred meaning anymore. And for this notion of sacred meaning, I would point you to one of our colleagues at the Institutes, Brendan Graham Dempsey's book, The Evolution of Meaning, where he talks about sacred meaning. And so we step back and we see that truly, when you take this lens and you start to just look around, you'll see this. You'll see it a lot. You'll see this world of the hyperreal. You know, Trump's meme coin that was released this weekend, at the intersection, I mean, just let this sink in, at the intersection of the world's most powerful office of planet-wide governance and a literal symbol of no fundamental anything except the symbol being the symbol, and it rising to 100 billion in value. That is not some aberration. I really want you to hear this. That's not an aberration of the hyperreal. That's its finest expression. That's the absolute necessity of the hyperreal. It's inescapable requirement. And that is what's happening in the lower left. Now, like anything, it's just like with the LA fires, it's unequally distributed. You know, if somebody is completely off social media, if they're completely kind of divorced themselves from the sign intermediated life world, then they are at least escaping it from a proximal or direct point of view. They're certainly not escaping it from a distal or indirect point of view, because that hyperreality is still influencing everyone else around them, plus the social systems and the cultural systems. It's inescapable for all of us, ultimately. Let's move on. I wish I could say that that was the only things we're dealing with. Alas, no. If any of you track the data, the epidemiological data on suicide, depression, existential ennui, sense of meaninglessness, we find people in a spiritual crisis. We find what John Vervaeke calls the meaning crisis. We find a sense that we don't know who we are. We don't know who we should be. We are bereft of a identity animated with meaning. How to find your way in a world, how to find your way or your footing in a world of crisis, a world of the hyperreal. And especially if you're a young person, you come into this world and you look around and you see adults who seem to be running around with their hair on fire, wildly confused. Because they are. Because they are. You are accurately apprehending that the inmates are running the asylum. You are accurately apprehending that the adults with power have no idea what they're doing. That we have a radical failure of our elites, and we need far better elites. That the people that we've made heroes, who pretend to have big picture minds, and the society doesn't have the discernment to see that they don't, really don't. And there's a reason why they fall into the complexity gap, because they're not able to see how to be and how to lead from a place of higher order being, higher order cognition, deeper spiritual and ethical commitment. And so it's no surprise that if you're a young person, you would find reason to have a feeling of a meaning crisis. And what's more, you can't find an adequate story of wholeness because we have ditched our spiritual stories. And your choices are a arid and bereft modern humanism, or what seems like perhaps an outdated mythological theism. And this is contributing to a radical and deep spiritual crisis. Now, if all of that weren't enough, we very quickly approach a technological singularity. For those of you who are familiar with the singularity, the concept is that our technology at some point, this was predicted by Kurzweil back in the 80s, because he could look at basically the growth of computing power as a logarithmic function and project it out and say, okay, well, basically by sometime in the 2020s or maybe 2030s, we're going to end up with computers that are able to get smarter than humans. And as soon as that happens, that goes nonlinear pretty fast. And at that point, we no longer can see past, like an event horizon of a black hole. We can no longer see past what the effects are of that. Because at that point, we have a non-human intelligence that's actually smarter than us. And what does that mean? And the answer is we don't know. That's why it's called a singularity. And anybody who's being honest needs to say that. We actually don't really know. But what we do know is that there may very well be artificial general intelligence within a couple of years. And if we get to AGI, it is probably not too far beyond that we get to ASI, artificial super intelligence. Now, 5 years ago, this still would have sounded a little bit like science fiction. And to be honest, it's all peering through a glass darkly, because a lot of this work is going on in AI labs and in some of the leading edge AI organizations. So all we can do is kind of listen to what the expert researchers from within those labs are saying about what they're seeing. But in the last few weeks, literally, those researchers are beginning to say they think they have credible line on AGI. They think they're seeing a line to it. Sam Altman from OpenAI said that a couple of weeks ago. And the researchers that are beginning to make noise are both excited and trepidatious about what they're seeing. They can't fully account for that. They can't fully account for what they're actually looking at. This is what you'd expect to hear as we approach the singularity. Now, it obviously promises an incredible period of innovation and possibly extraordinary things. And we want to not lose sight of that. It is, let's go back to our model where we think about disciplinary and then interdisciplinary knowledge, for example. If we know that Einsteinian physics revolutionized classical Newtonian physics with a form of perhaps interdisciplinary, but certainly very advanced cognition, and we get an AGI going to ASI, but let's just stay with a very, very intelligent AGI that is capable of doing work at a PhD or even post-PhD level in an interdisciplinary way, then it is merely at that point a matter of compute power and cycles before you can throw it at extraordinary problems in math, physics, biology, computational biology, cancer research, et cetera, right? And those problems will begin to get knocked down at a rate that goes nonlinear. And truly you're in a brave new world where you could see life-changing innovation in a matter of, a week by week or month by month. That's the promise. But to say that our governance is radically ill-prepared for it would be a massive understatement. We are simply, and maybe it is always the case that governance has to follow technology. It tends to historically. But you would like to see our governance systems perhaps a little better prepared at metabolizing change in a participatory way than what we seem to demonstrate ourselves capable of. Because these are going to be extraordinary fractures to the social world. I believe there is a very real risk that AI destroys social mobility, for example. Social mobility, as you might know, is the ability especially in a modern democratic world that we've seen a lot of. Social mobility is the ability to move up and down the class ladder. And for lack of a better term, it's economic opportunity. It's the ability to move. It's ability to, through hard work, effort, risk-taking, et cetera, to improve your lot. I see a world with a GI where classes get reified, and they get reified fast because the opportunity space for innovation stagnates, because AI and whoever controls AI will be able to occupy innovation niches so quickly that entrepreneurship changes from adding value inside of those emergent social ecological niches to now entrepreneurship becomes what it was in the feudal era of seeking political protection and patronage, because that's the only structures that will allow for you to create any kind of incremental value. And at that point, it's not really value, it's just redistribution. So AGI is going to present a profound risk, in my view, of neo-feudalism. This would not be, to remind us, this would not be a radical departure from all of human history. This would be a return to what human history has been. For 12,000 years, we've been a species of significant wealth inequality. Many periods that are actually worse wealth inequality than we have today. The history of that is that wealth inequality does not get leveled by education. It does not get leveled by regulation. It does not get leveled by politics. None of those things do it. So if you get to a point where the wealth inequality comes back to its historic norm, you are in a situation where it probably stays there for a while. It has a lot of ontological inertia, you might say. The things that do level wealth inequality are things like world wars, pandemics, total state collapse. I think it's Walter Scheidel called it the four horsemen of the leveling. Total state collapse and transformative revolutions. Most revolutions within a state don't level wealth inequality. They actually make it worse. So this slide is showing you that this techno-economic singularity is this extraordinary set of forces that are going to come up from the social and cultural structures and increasingly set the background of our lives, right? Which is really what this slide is. At the top is the agent or the individual, and below in the lower quadrants is our social and cultural surrounds. Let us move on. We are also seeing a tsunami, a collapse in our global governance contract, our basic global governance contract. I've written about this in my essay, The Great Release, to some degree in The Great Divide. But what we see when we look at 800 years of sort of political economic history is we see a cycle of hegemonic breakdown. Hegemons arise, as it did with the Genoese financial network, as it then did with the Dutch United Provinces, as it then later did with the British Empire, as it did then with the United States in 1945. For 80 years, we've been living in a Pax Americana that is characterized by almost total US unipolar superpower hegemony, financially, economically, and there's a difference there, militarily, security-wise, and to a large degree ideologically. We have been foisting international liberalism upon the world for that 80-year period. But that entire 80-year cycle has shattered. It's disintegrating. At least since, this is a nuanced story we could go into if you want, but due to all kinds of decisions that we've made along the way, and typical of empires that ever have hegemony, they always end up abusing it, basically. And in particular, it is the elites within the hegemon, within the empire, that abuse it in order to extract wealth from the periphery globally, and also from the domestic classes. And what you see is a extraordinary blossoming of wealth at the 1% every time. You see a gilded era at the 1% every time, because they always sell out the domestic productive classes to financialization and globalization in order to extract wealth from their imperial power. That is precisely what we've seen, and it is what has given rise to a reactionary populism around the Western Alliance. That is exactly why we are seeing reactionary populism. As Polanyi said, fascism is a reaction to the failure of market liberalism to protect society. And that is what the Great Release is. We are, after 1990, really our international liberalism became nothing but a fig leaf. And really, we've been engaged in increasingly in a realist imperialism. We're returning now to a pre-World War I imperialism, realist imperialism. And that is now, that's not even hidden anymore. As of 3 days ago, let's see, what's today, the 23rd. So the inauguration was on the 20th. As of 3 days ago, that's no longer even, we don't even use that as a fig leaf. It is now explicit. What has, up to this moment, for several years, if not decades, been implicit. We are now a realist. We're engaged in a realist imperial struggle and contest. And the problem is we can't be a domestic focused realist imperium, as MAGA wants us to be, while also continuing to hollow out our middle class with our twin deficits and the money supply games that the wealthy use to win, but also are part of the old game that characterized what we were doing up to this point. So this is all what's happening with the breakdown of US-led leadership on the world stage. And this is extraordinarily destabilizing, because what it does is it creates fractures in the social and political processes by which these countries are trying to make decisions and navigate change. If you put it all together, you are living in a metacrisis. A metacrisis is a term that has come out of our community. I think Sean Hargens and Nick Hedlund were the first to use it. It comes on the back of work also that others in other communities have called the polycrisis. So we're not the only ones to have been seeing it. The metacrisis, I think, is a more depth and complex term than what a lot of other folks have seen. And we have an initiative going on at the Institute that is going to theorize this in a very, very deep way at the level of the deep structures and generative mechanisms led by Nick. But all of that aside, put yourself in the middle of this slide. Where's the white space? You have a little bit of white space in terms of your daily behavior. Maybe a little bit of white space in terms of your identity, like who am I? But man, does it feel pretty stultifying. It feels pretty enveloping. Now, it is fair to see or say that, and I've actually criticized the metacrisis on this basis, that the metacrisis is something that metasystematic minds see. Another way to say it is like, if you're going to have an integral mind, of course you're going to see a metacrisis. That's what integral minds do. You generate a metacrisis. And so in a self-reflexive way, we can be self-critical and say, yeah, this is what we're seeing because this is what metasystematic minds are going to do. I think there's something real to that we need to be humble about and acknowledge. But that doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make it inaccurate. It doesn't make it unreal. It might mean that we're seeing something and living in a reality that for us, we can make object, and that for many, many others is still just subject. And so these warping processes, this red here, is something we may be able to see in objective terms, and we can theorize about it, we can explain it. But for a lot of other people, this is subject. It's there. It's causal. It has real power, but they may not be able to see it and feel it in ways that they can put outside themselves. Instead, it becomes a hidden force in so many different dimensions. And so it is still warping. And we'll get into some of the actual developmental, what Margaret Archer calls the meta-reflexivity that we have as our problem with folks not being able to see that. So how do we sum all this up? Well, we're going into the transformation age. Like it's no longer theoretical. We're here. It's on. We are involved in, speaking of Margaret Archer, we're involved in what she calls a morphogenic society. So I told you what I saw at my TED Talk in 2012. Obviously, I wasn't the only person to see it, although I didn't know that at the time. There's a whole lineage of metasystematic or teal and turquoise level sociologists that had also seen it and were theorizing on it this entire time, and they call it the Morphogenic Society. The Morphogenic Society is an era of radical fracture from prior civilizational modes that have arisen. The key to a morphogenic society is what I've talked about before. Change dominates stasis because there becomes amplifying feedback loops between your social and cultural systems and their rates of change and their processes of change. And as that positive feedback loop occurs, then you then end up with auto-generative variety, which can be fantastic in some ways, but you also end up with auto-generative destabilization of the structures that hold the world together. This is why, precisely why, right now, amidst the Great Release, amidst the governance problems we've talked about, amidst all of the other pieces that we just looked at, we have shattering shared normativity. In a morphogenic society, you have normativity, shared normativity drop, meaning we no longer have a shared normative space. We have a group of people who can attack a sacred symbol in the form of our building, our capital. Part of the population is going to see that as an attack on the sacred and a violation of a long-standing, deep, normative principle that holds our society together. Another group of people can come to believe that it was a justifiable act of defiance against an institutional order that is oppressive, that is unjust and illegitimate. That sort of breakdown in shared normativity, as just an example, is what we're seeing everywhere. And in a morphogenic society, then social integration breaks down. So this is a challenge we're going to have. It's a challenge of our life world. It's a challenge for leaders to take seriously about how do you then help to recohere normative spaces that can withstand the pluralism. You know, we talk about integral consciousness being something that can make room for all other forms of pluralistic knowing and being, well, you're about to get the chance. You're about to be asked to walk your talk. Now, as a response to these things, and then I'll stop because I want to make sure we have some time to talk. As a response to these things, in the upper left, we can build big picture minds and start to get space and bring light into our world as we make sense of it, as we understand it. It is not so complicated that it won't give itself over to rational processes. We can actually understand it, not totally, but using a holographic mind, by using the kind of cognitive tools we have, and immersed in a community of people who can discuss it and wayfind together, we can generate the space and the freedom to be amidst the complexity without it overwhelming us. We can build minds that are at home in the universe and help us make sense of the complexity of the transformation age. But we don't have to stop there. We can also commit to what I have called cosmic integrity, which is this deep ethic of integrative love, service, compassion, and which, wherever it goes, whatever room it walks into, it's there to serve wholeness at its highest order. It's there to liberate the partialities. It's there to expose the demi-realities, the blind spots, wherever you go. And to be immersed in a community where you can both learn how to do this, but also shares the ethic of doing this. And through its very actions, through its very being in the world, that community prefigures the future that the present demands. And that's our job. Our job as a community is to prefigure the future. And we can keep going. Because every behavior you do, every action and every decision you make will either reproduce the cultural and social system around you, or it will transform it. Every single one, every single interaction, every single moment, we get to birth the world anew. And so we can literally engage in transformative behavior that no one can stop. No one can take away the agency. And this is a power and a freedom that needs to be communicated. That we have a choice in the world that gets born right now. And finally, if we're going to be entering a world of material abundance, at least that's capable of radical material abundance, and we want a world of moral equality, participative diversity, and a world that can make room for everyone, then after our base needs are met, it calls us to think about and work towards a sustainable commons. That the work in the lower right ultimately is going to have to be about a commons that is sustainable. Not necessarily communist, not necessarily socialist, not that transcends the narrow categories we tend to think about from the point of view of political economy, but that recognizes that we actually have the power to have a commons that works in a world of where increasingly value is going to be distributed across the digital world, across many different areas, and that we can commit to doing that. And if we do all of those things, as we can see, the picture is getting lighter and lighter and lighter. If we operate in 4 quadrants, it gets lighter and lighter. The freedom is coming up. The agency is coming up. The fullness, the consciousness, the way in which we are connected and we're supporting each other. And ultimately, what happens is that you become the transformative force that overcomes the metacrisis. Today, not tomorrow, now. Now. Background radiation gets filled and overcome. That is my message to the Zoomers. That is what I want them to hear. And with that, I will stop and open it up for discussion, questions. Thank you for being patient. Again, from a monologue point of view, it's not totally my intention to do that every time, but I thought it was important that we set a background frame for a lot of these sort of big picture concepts, at least how I think about it.
Thank you for that brilliant synopsis of the future and challenges we face. Totally wonderful to hear this. But as I look around all the Zoom photos here, I don't see any Zoomers. What are we going to do about that?
Exactly. Yeah, and that is, so we know that, right? We know that. We know that one of the issues we have is that first of all, the nature of these transdisciplinary big pictures came out of a boomer-led spiritual knowledge movement of the late 20th century, right? That's when a lot of those folks started tuning in to this kind of thing, especially at the leading edge, and that it has not gotten the cultural relevance amongst a TikTok generation. And yet we know that they, in some ways, they need it and they want it. And I've verified that by talking to a lot of Zoomers personally. And as they've come in and found us and joined Integral Life as a member or whatever, because I actually had that same question, like, I don't know, maybe it's just totally irrelevant. And at a certain portion of them, not irrelevant at all. So what we need to do is we need to do a far better job of getting this message out and recruiting ambassadors amongst that generation to do so. So we have several efforts underway. We have a new integral communication program, what we're calling the Integral Ambassador Program, that Corey DeVos and Stephanie Lepp are going to be leading on behalf of the Institute. This is a nonprofit grant-funded effort initiative to act as a distribution vehicle for the mimetic spreading of, it's literally the gospel, right? The gospel is, the good news here is that there is a different and better way for you to orient. We don't have all the answers, but we can help you understand what is a good big picture versus a bad big picture. Like what's a fake big picture versus a good big picture. And that's the work we need to do. So we do have efforts underway, but we need to do a far better job of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of my concerns is you are so smart. You're so intellectual. And a lot of the terms that you use can be, I mean, I'm reaching for understanding them. And if you're going to speak to the lay people out there, like as you went on to explain it, I was following and I was tracking and I was good. At the very beginning, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be lost here. There's a lot of intellectuals on this talk this today. I'm not an intellectual. I'm just an ordinary lay person who's reaching to understand all this. I feel the ground beneath me moving. And I want to understand what's going on. And I want to be able to be an ambassador for that understanding. I've been with Wilbur for years, but again, I'm a lay person. And if you're going to reach a lot of lay people, we need to bring the languaging in a way that simplifies it for the rest of us. And we don't get lost in large terms, meta this. even the word cognition now is something I understand, but it's like, am I making any sense?
Well, of course, and when you build a movement, if you think about somebody like I'll pick one at random, like the Obama movement, right? There was a great communicator at the front of that movement, and there was an entire machine of people who had different parts to play. The reality is that yeah, you're going to have your intellectuals doing intellectual stuff. You're going to have your social activists doing social activist stuff. You're going to have your researchers doing scholarly stuff. You're going to have your website builders doing website building stuff. So it's going to require a lot of people coming together in a more and more integrated and cohesive way under a shared worldview and some shared understanding of the problem in order to build a network of getting knowledge and getting this broader worldview out. I'm not even just talking about integral philosophy. I'm talking about all of the emergent teal and emergent turquoise world space. We could go into it, but I will go into it. So, going to prove your point right here. In the sociology of philosophies, Randall Collins showed that in any given era, there's only what he calls the law of small numbers. There is a finite attention space for a given ideological set of ideas or superstructure to basically win that era, right? And it's only 3 to 6. So let me say this differently. If the emergent teal and turquoise idea space does not adequately form itself to compete as one of 3 to 6 big ideas on the planet today, it will not succeed. So what I'm thinking about as a leader in this movement and as a leader of the Institute, what I'm thinking about is how do we assemble a network across boundaries with all of the various people from different backgrounds and lineages and intellectual inspirations, whatever, but all of whom are fundamentally doing a form of integrative worldview work. How do we form a bigger meta network that can then compete on the world stage and create the social and political agreements amongst that group so that we amplify the signal across the entire network and out into the world? Because even though the integral movement is small and niche and largely irrelevant, and this other movement over here is small and niche and largely irrelevant, and you kind of go around and you say, well, these are all small and niche and largely irrelevant. You start to assemble them though, and all of a sudden you get much bigger throw power. In fact, Brandon Norgard is on here, and I'm going to be asking for his help at the Institute to help to do some of this work too. So we are recruiting everybody. Like, we're going to recruit great people to do a lot of different pieces to take this stuff seriously. And you don't need to know the terms. You don't need to know the vocabulary, although part of what we're doing with the work I mentioned with Corey and Stephanie is to create what we're calling vocabularies of liberation. And these should be digestible vocabularies. It should be put into terms people can actually get their hands around and that they can understand. And so will create, a sort of meaning in their life. And they don't have to be able to understand everything I just said, but as long as they're getting a glimpse of like, oh, okay, there actually are elites in the world that are not totally confused, running around with their head cut off and trying to profit off me or grift me, then that's a start, right? So yes, I totally agree with you, and we are accounting for that. But you all have a role to play. If you have money, donate it. If you have intellectual work you can do it. If you're a scholar, start doing research with us. If you're, whatever you do, whoever you are, if you're an Interlife member, you're helping. If you're showing up in this space to support the people who are doing these dialogues and even just giving them the spiritual nourishment that, like, they're not wasting their time in life, great. You're all playing a part, and that is absolutely critical. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad I was able to join today. I really related to what Marilyn Jane was saying about the difficulty of the language. I understand that you can only think at the level of your vocabulary, so you need these big fancy words to explain these really difficult concepts. And when I was first introduced to Ken Wilber, I was gobsmacked because I'm a big reader and I could not read him. And I had to learn how to sit down and read Wilber, which required me to schedule time when I was at my optimal and have a dictionary and a desk. I mean, this was not like I'm going to sit down and read a book. And I've been working on this for almost 20 years. I'm just starting to get it. But I really also want to thank you because I have been thinking about a lot of the things that you've been saying for the last few years and trying to get somebody to tell me that I'm not just somebody who should be wearing a tinfoil hat. And your models really kind of gelled it and reaffirmed or validated. Yeah, okay, Kathleen, you're not crazy. One of the things that I have been looking for from this community is examples of what teal and turquoise looks like today. Like, tell me a story of somebody who's actually doing this. I keep putting it on the discussion page. I'm getting crickets. My gift. I'm not a PhD in any of these things. My gift is I'm a trainer. I take these complicated terms and turn them into something digestible. I'm a retired trainer, so I don't know if I'm going to be doing this in my, I'll have the impact that I had a few years ago, but I can't do that until I have a better grasp on it. And what I'm looking for is to see how, show me some examples where I can point to. The only ones I've really seen are some of the guy who followed after Claire Graves and some of the work he's done in South Africa.
On back.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, that's one of the things I'm losing is words and names. But there's just not that much to really explain this. And this is what I've been actually trying to do for the last couple of years is just explain this to people who are sort of around me and then be able to stay in that space that you talked about being able to live it.
Yeah.
And keep that compassion. And I believe that the compassion is the most critical element. My big concern is that if we have to get 3 to 6% of the people at turquoise teal, statistically, if you have to go through all the levels, the chances of us getting that at every higher level are obviously diminishing severely. I haven't sat down and tried to figure out how to do math. And I'm wondering now, because I had been fearing that we were going to return to something like a feudal age, won't society drop down to lower levels than we've already achieved? And how can we help accelerate people to move through the levels faster so that we have a statistical chance of getting enough people to those levels to form this network that you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, all good questions that we could spend many hours on, and I'd be happy to do it. And many questions come out of that. So let me just do it very briefly though by saying that our meta thesis of change is that number one, you have to help elites see what they're not seeing. And you can either do that with the current generation of elites, or you can try to train the next generation who will be your elites in 10 years, 10 or 15 years. But you're right, you are not going to move the population fast enough. And it's not even clear that we know how to do it or that anybody knows how to do it. Not to mention the educational inertia. But there's no question about the nature of the work that we're on about ultimately. Ultimately, we are in the transformative education space. That is actually what the nature of this entire project is. I feel very confident about that after having explored the question you just asked in very concrete ways over the last several years. And always, at the end of the day, at the core of our institute's social action projects there's basically a transformative education requirement. Who are we going to educate in a transformative way that is going to change something? And you're not going to do it at a broad enough scale amongst the population. But what you might be able to do is you might be able to do it with the elites in certain key structural domains that helps a lot, number one. And number two, what you can do with broader populations is just give them a better story. You can actually, this is where stories matter. Just stories have high distributional effects. So you can actually get a better new 21st century story of wholeness on the docket and in the mimetic space. That is something we can do for widespread consumption. And those are both big meta theories of change that this movement should fundamentally be oriented to. And probably, I mean, in some ways, not even a third. Like, that's it. Those are the two. Thank you for the question. Brandon, let's bring you on. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Okay, so I remember you saying shortly after the election, we had that call, and you said there could essentially be a ratcheting down effect with a, I don't believe you used this exact words, but the way I would put it is a fraying of the sociocultural fabric that is holding together our peaceful coexistence that we tend to take for granted with, okay, the political system in the U.S. descending into a more of a patronage network, and the rule of law not really applying to people equally. It's going to be, more based on the loyalty rather than, loyalty to a figure or to, an inner circle rather than, an actual more objective application of the rule of law. And you have, a process, you can have violence breaking out and reprisals and, ratcheting down of the, political and economic system. Some people are going to get rich and richer, but then, what I'm thinking though is to start to counteract that. I think this movement we're looking at here has some grassroots potential, but how would, I'm not sure where we would want to focus our limited resources. Would it be into cultural development, more in the lower left, or in maybe technology development that would foster, more decentralized, communications and security, like in the upper right, or the dynamics of interaction in the lower right, or in the individual personal growth, which in the upper left. And that's what I think, that I get the sense that the integral movement is focused on that primarily in, not to the exclusion of all other, but that has been the primary, the most important emphasis in many integral circles in the last, 20, 30 years. So, I mean, how might we kind of distribute our limited resources that maybe have the highest impact to try to counteract this potential ratcheting down and further fraying of the social cultural fabric?
Yeah, I think you'd want to first step back and ask yourself whether that is a good and useful thing to do at all, right? Whether there's not some way in which that's like last year's war. To the extent that we are going through a reactionary regression to an authoritarianism inside of the Western Alliance, you're not going to have changed, to have changed that effect, we would have needed to work on it 15 or 20 years ago. Everything you do now is an ameliorative kind of response. Now, that may be perfectly good thing to do. I'm not saying it's not, but I am thinking that you'd probably want to step back and really say, okay, what is then the counter reaction polarity that occurs, and what are the set of initiatives that would want to come out of that to try to amplify that, or to support some of that counterbalancing. So those are all good questions. And those are the kind of things that if we had again, this goes back to leadership. If you have a leader or a set of leaders that were really interested in that, you'd look at that at the Institute, you'd look at that through that lens and say, what do we know about the best way to not solve for fascism, but kind of dissolve it, right? And I always want to think that way, because how do you get underneath it and kind of help to undermine its generative mechanisms? But unfortunately, these things are so meta, and they're so related to these big meta forces that have to do with the failure of global market liberalism and the way in which fascism arises as the national body's response to protect itself from a globalizing financialization in the form of xenophobic authoritarianism. You also have to be realistic. Like, okay, what do we do about that? I think what we can do is the very thing we're doing here. You can name it. You can say, all right, here's the big cycles we're involved in, brace for impact. And then hopefully you can also give tomorrow's leaders, the Zoomers or whomever, the education and the capacities they need to be inside of those systems, but to be transforming them as they go. And so again, if you're building technology, which we do, perfectly legitimate thing to do. If you're building a social movement, no matter which quadrant you're in, ultimately you're going to be doing a form of transformative education, because ultimately you're trying to get the agent to be the force of transformation inside of a context that you don't control. And so in a way, you're trying to spread that kind of that integral spiritual virus, for lack of a better term, right? That's what you want operating. That's my answer. But obviously it's a very, very hard question, and it'd be worth looking at as a whole project just in itself, and a worthwhile one. Phyllis, hi.
Hi, thank you so much, Rob. This has really been great, and thank you so much. My question is a little bit like digging in the weeds, and I hope, well, you spoke about the idea of this being the rise of a morphological society, right?
Morphogenic, yeah.
A morphogenic society. And then you spoke about the lower right hand, building the commons. And that those two things seem really antithetical to me. You know, one is where we are, if I'm understanding it correctly. The rise of the morphogenic society is where you think that we are right now, and the building of the commons is where we need to be. And the whole idea of fragmentation in society has been, it's something that Vervaeke speaks about. It's something about, lack of coherence, whereby we don't have a truth that we share anymore as a society. Everything is so fragmented. So what I'm wondering is if those two things, the way that we are right now, morphogenic society, and the building the commons, are opposites that perhaps cannot be reconciled, or are they polarities that can be worked with? And if they are polarities that can be worked with, then how does one work with them? And even though I'm sort of in the weeds, I'm sort of using this as an example of what this whole conversation has been about, because it seems like there are the things that seem so drastically opposed to the way that we see them, hyperreality, a hyperobject, a whole thing, a metacrisis. But the way that it is that everything is fragmented.
Yeah. Well, it's important to notice already, we have commons. Like, we have a commons. We have all kinds of things that we share in common, that are shared communal goods, relational goods, to talk about, at least to some degree, how Margaret Archer talks about it, who talks about the morphogenic society. So there already is a commons. The question is in 25 years, if we have solved for largely free energy, for example, or functional immortality and lifespans have gone another 20 or 25 years and cancer is being eradicated, and we have AI that's, generating personalized genetic medicine and all these other things. Are we in a world where that has become neo-feudal in the sense that we have this ultra elite upper class that controls all of the means of exchange and all the means of production, and have warped the political processes accordingly to guarantee that sort of stays in place? And then we have a radically large, largely socially immobile underclass of servants, and in which case your commons has been shrunk to something that is a fraction of what it could be, right? And so the morphogenic observation is just pointing out that there's a process going on whereby culture and society systems are constantly kind of generating new variety that is making it feel fragmented. The structures are changing all the time, and an agent within that system has a very hard time getting their bearings. They have a very hard time knowing how to get the world that they want. They often don't have the self-reflexivity to situate themselves inside of that social or cultural space in any way that they know where the ideologies are shaping them into like ways, putting their lives into modes that are stultifying to them, or are holding them back, et cetera, right? And so the morphogenic process, as it relates to the commons, are not dialectically opposed. One actually provides, done properly, it provides a lot of opportunity to allow for more flourishing of the commons if, it's a big if, we can bring the processes or whatever sort of resources and interventions and support to bear that would allow for those changing structures to be changed in better ways, in more conscious ways, in ways that serve the commons, and moved away from that neo-feudalism, as opposed to going the way that they're going to want to go, because capital usually wins. Capital usually wins. And that's the whole point about the wealth inequality, and what Marx and Engels showed in the German ideology is that because capital controls the means of political mobilization, but they also controls the means of mental production. So therefore, it's able to create the ideological space that sets the boundaries of what people think is possible. Capital usually wins. But that same morphogenic process is not 15th century Germany, or what back then was the Holy Roman Empire. We're no longer we're not involved in that. Those same morphogenic processes are a world of TikTok and YouTube and whatever, where there are means of dissemination of getting around the interests of capital and to do things that are that have their own kind of power. Like, we have power here, we have agency, and we can actually leverage morphogenic processes to the betterment of people. And the thing is it taps into a natural spiritual desire anyway. When we talk about the initiatives we do, we always want to tap some very innate drive that people have. And I think that there is an innate drive for this freedom and fullness that this would generate. But we have to show up. We have to show up, and we have to do it. Long story short, those things are not opposed.
Thank you.
We have to learn to put our own oxygen mask on individually. And I would even say put the oxygen mask on for this movement.
Because if we're going to get to the 3.5% or so cultural tipping point, where if you can get people out on the streets peacefully and mobilizing, which is what we tried to do during Occupy, that got thwarted, or even our own personal solvency. You know, I see perhaps the first crisis most likely to be economic. You know, we're in the mother of all bubbles. We saw supply chain problems during COVID. And as we should know, if things start to unravel, then we tend to go down the spiral as opposed to up the spiral, you know, personally, just keeping our own lives. And everybody on this call we are the privileged people. You know, we have time on an afternoon on a Thursday for a call, you know. But I would say this ember of a movement is incredibly important. If you believe what Wilbur and others say, that every rise in consciousness, and especially like the leap to second tier, has an exponential effect. You know, where this movement could be 100, 1,000 times, you know, greater. So, what should we be doing, or what should we be talking about to keep our own lives and communities going? And then the embers of this movement going, if this is going to be a potential positive response, you know, people tend to get blindsided during obviously fires, floods, economic. So I'm just curious.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that any differently than I already have, in the sense that we are doing it. We're doing it today. We're doing it with our call to leadership. We're doing it with our call to scholars, to donors, and we're meshing those resources together. We're trying to be intelligent about where those things get applied. You know, I would love someone who had already been involved in many big movements, who was successful, to come in and say, "Oh, okay, cool. Here's all the things you're doing wrong. Let me help," and away we go. Like, okay, cool. I mean, that'd be great. But given that we have what we have, we have to just do the things that we're doing. Um, and I think that actually this very call is a form of putting our oxygen mask on. Right? You're not alone. I'm not alone. We are a spore. Like, we're going to be a hard to kill spore. That even in a breakdown, like, there is a network of people that have they're a shared tribe of meaning. They have a shared worldview, and they refuse to die before they die. And that, you know, that's all I can do. So I don't know how to do more than we're already doing.
Thank you for everything so far. I'm thinking of, in our response to the polycrisis, what is the role of waking up as defined by Ken? Is it, if we all spend a lot of time trying to get to a non-dual reality, is that going to be helpful in our response to the polycrisis? Because everything you've spoken about so far is, you know, basically, you know, standard technical solutions, technology, you know, reaching out to individuals in the real world. What is the role of higher consciousness, shall we say?
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing, right? In the upper left, that building a big picture mind is, of course, the growing up process of being able to see enough to where you feel at home in the world, and now you can navigate it as a leader or in your job or whatever. So you can become the transformative force because you're not being overwhelmed by the wave. You're now surfing it. You're on top of it. But at the core of that, as we know, I'm using that big picture mind as a you know, as a single set of words to hold the entire concept of what it means to awaken truly the big story of wholeness that's inside of you, that is a credible, integral, pluralistic, non-dual, panentheistic state of being. And the role of your natural state is the ground that allows you to move through any environment with absolute fearlessness and absolute peace at your core, and absolute compassion and love. So it is not optional. It's necessary. It's the ground upon which it all sits, is practicing into regular access into your natural state. So yeah, that is the foundation of the entire thing.
Because that whole spiritual dimension then is actually core to building this transformational
Yes.
response to the polycrisis.
Yes.
How do you get Zoomers to meditate?
First thing I think you do, again, I think you have to give them a better and more credible big picture story of wholeness. I think that's why we call it that. Like, there actually is a story of wholeness that holds water as a universe evolving into higher and higher forms of meaning. That meaning is sacred all the way down and all the way up. But aren't you lucky? Because you are among the most meaningful things that we know of. And oh, by the way, as you practice that, you're going to allow that meaning to drop away into something even more profound, which is your identity, your real identity. And your real identity as such is going to dissolve your fear and your sense of alienation, because that's what's real.
So you're saying that basically some deeper form of spiritual enlightenment is actually core to the transformation age.
It's of course the core to every age, but yes, for sure. I have a hard time knowing what to say about whether we place that as like the requirement, because I want to be careful with that. But absolutely, that's the invitation, that if you're going to ground yourself in a morphogenic age, taking the extraordinary heritage of the world's non-dual traditions. And, here I'll refer to Sean Hargens, who's done wonderful work in showing, in showing the 50 non-dual traditions that have popped up around the world in every lineage and every geography and what have you, and all the different ways that they have complexified the subject-object dissolution. That's it. That's the 21st century story. Kids need to know about this. Adults need to know about this, right? It's amazing. It's your birthright, and it'll help you. It'll help you live the life that you can live.
Yeah, I'd be curious also, just kind of jumping on what Phyllis brought up around and your conversation about the morphogenic societies. I think, what would you see as is a necessary morphostatic for us to kind of hold on to and resist certain kinds of change in some ways, as opposed to morphogenic?
That's a great question, isn't it? Because that's precisely what's going on politically, is to some degree people standing in the void screaming, please stop the processes of change. And unfortunately, that's why we're seeing the reactionary regression that we are, because it's overwhelming to them. I wrote about this in The Great Divide, that there's a way in which, politically we're going to say, because remember what the morphogenic society does, it generates variety, right? So think about gender variety and think about how threatening that has been to morphostatic tradition. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. You're asking the really important question, like from an integral point of view, how do you allow for a preservation and integration? And of course, what integration is doing, as you well know, so just for the audience, like integration, of course, is finding higher order structures that are able to qualitatively reorganize what had come before. And so by definition, integrative structures from the point of view of governance, or our organizations, or our communities, or the way in which we organize our housing projects. I mean, it doesn't matter what level of scale you look at. You could say, all right, how do those things, how are they designed more integratively so that they can handle and balance the morphogenesis that's going on inside of all of the world around them. And so you might need more flexible institutional architectures, for example. You might need more adaptive educational infrastructures. You might need more personalized and adaptive healthcare systems. You might need more subsidiarity in your political processes, so that more and more of the decision making is pushed down to the local levels through participative democracy forms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So once you get the meta view, you can start to say, okay, I see how this gets refracted by trying to create integral structures that balance the polarity that's going to be increasingly at tension, which is a high degree of change.
Namali, what you were just saying about the morphogenic society. My background with the idea of I called it morphology by mistake because my background is language. And one of the first things that attracted me to Ken was the way that he spoke about the underlying grammar that we all know, but we don't actually acknowledge in our daily life. We don't really pay attention to that underlying grammar. And the underlying grammar of a morpheme it's a syllable, part of a word, part of a sentence, part of a paragraph, part of a larger context. So I'm just wondering if there's any utilization, do you think, in reverse engineering it and looking at the larger picture and then bringing it down as you would a grammatical sentence and bringing it down from the big picture? Or do you think that the best way to do it is from is with the telos of moving to something more complicated?
Yeah. The postmodernists, of course, were the ones who did such a great job of trying to look at structure and diagnose and challenge and confound the notion of structural grammars that find themselves in our language systems, in our cultural and media artifacts and productions, and then follow through, as Foucault showed, with our in power systems and political and otherwise. And so all of these ways in which grammar, to use that in a more kind of archaeological sense or structural sense, grammar structures the nature of our life world in the lower left and lower right there's huge disciplines dedicated to that. One of the challenges, of course, is they kind of ran into some dead ends because they didn't have the verticality that allowed for those grammars to find more integrative architectures, higher wholenesses that would integrate the pluralism in structures that could then hold diverse grammars in a way that was not seen as hegemonic and was not seen as oppressive, right? This is the integralist or postmodern critique of the postmodern kind of cul-de-sacs that occurred. And so with that as a backdrop, I think if I understood your question correctly, is there a way in which those grammars can be understood and then refracted through an integrative lens in order to try to sort of restructure in the way that we're talking about, so create new structures of integratively pluralistic liberation? I think the answer is yes. I think we're seeing that with the development of, we could pick several things, but we'll just pick a protocol, right? We're seeing protocols, for example, in the open source community. We're seeing protocols with DAOs on the blockchain. We're seeing protocols get developed in different ways, which are configuring the commons in a way of sharing resources across time and space and value or whatever, that are in effect reconfigured grammars that are socioeconomic sort of spaces. So yeah, one of the things we do talk about quite a bit at the Institute when we look at a project is protocols, because I think protocols is one of the ways that occurs. Because remember what a protocol is. It's a commitment to a set of rules that then allows for a massive amount of participative but fundamentally pluralistic flourishing within it. And so, for example, when we think about an integral theological paradigm, one of the ways that I've suggested we think about it is as a theological protocol that can hold all of the traditions within it, but in a content neutral way. And that's ultimately what a lot of the teal and turquoise cognitive frames are doing. Again, it's metadisciplinary. It's not at the level of discipline or content specific. So again, we're kind of in the weeds. For those who didn't want to go like really geek out, sorry, we did it, but that's yeah. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for humoring me.
Brandon.
All right, yeah. So, in a private message here, someone asked me about, maybe we could get someone like Pete Buttigieg, to promote some of this, or just looking at the reality of the media landscape is, there's only a few people who are getting attention, and among who has this intersection of both, a public figure who is also seems to be at the evolutionary integral center of gravity altitude.
Yeah.
So there aren't, that many. I would, Pete Buttigieg, Marianne Williamson, perhaps some others who we could use as a way of promoting, if we're ready. We don't want it to go, get too watered down and become, promoted that just as like a fad or as a, shadow green type of thing. But just as a possibility, like we could enlist, some public figure as a way of having that conduit to get into more, communities.
Yeah, I mean, I've said for quite a long time that Buttigieg is the smartest and most naturally integrative politician in the country today. And I mean, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen anybody else that I think gets close.
You don't think Marianne Williamson gets close?
No, I don't think she has the instinct for integrating the contrapolarities the way that Pete does. But reasonable people could disagree about that, but that's just my sense. Now, if we were to if Pete were to walk in today, I'd be happy to obviously talk with him and talk about all this stuff, but ultimately you'd have to be really careful about saying, well, what are we trying to accomplish with that? I mean, the best you could try to accomplish with somebody like him or others is not to turn them into evangelists for what we're doing. That doesn't matter. What matters is looking at their role in the context in which they're doing it and asking yourself, how can their role be more integrative in the sense that you help them to not step into the blind spots that are going to decrease the efficacy of what they're doing from the point of view of integration. And so that would be our role with someone like that. It would not be to have an evangelist, because we don't matter. What matters is that we're using a big picture mind to help frame where the partialities, the polarities, the dynamic tensions are that are going to or that are going to undermine efficacy for leaders as they navigate these very real world high tension systems. And by the way, I think we actually could do that. And had the Democratic Party listened to integralists 20 years ago, they would not have stepped into the blowback that they're getting right now, and they probably could have avoided a huge part of the reactionary backlash. So this is not theoretical. I actually believe that is the case. Thank you, Brandon. Okay, I'm seeing that it's at the hour. Thanks everybody for staying over. I know it was Yeah, Jacinda. I actually don't know much about Jacinda. I've noticed her, but I'm not. I can't comment on her. She's the PM of New Zealand. For those who don't know. Um, okay, so thank you everybody for being here. That was it. That was the first kickoff. Like I said, schedule allowing, I'll try to do another one of these here the next couple of months. But I appreciate all of you for showing up, and please send me. You've got my email or anything else. Send comments or questions if I can be of help. And that's it. Thank you for all your support in Integral Life. It means the world to us.